talk about a topic I've been wanting to chat about for quite some time now. A long time now, actually. Anyway, an incident happened recently, last week in fact, that made me decide, okay, it's time to do this podcast. And the topic for today is anger. Is anger ever valid? Do you have different forms of anger? As the way I understand it, we have righteous anger, unrighteous anger, buried anger, rage, fury, all these types of things. Is anger ever valid or is it ever justified? The incident that happened to me last week was, well, it was my fault and I had to apologize. Let me tell you about it. So, before I discuss it, before I take a deep dive into this topic, I have to admit that just last week I got very angry with somebody, and somebody I like very, very much. And what triggered me was a particular unmet expectation. Expectations will nail you every time. I learned about that in a self-awareness course many years ago. So I have to admit, guilty as charged, I overreacted. I didn't handle it very well. It was clearly a case of me losing control of my emotions, it's out of character for me because I dealt with anger issues many, many years ago when I was doing shadow work. But sometimes, you know, it wants to pop up again. But nonetheless, it was not a positive form of anger, such as what we would call, say, a righteous anger, which many spiritual leaders have expressed, like Jesus the Christ, Mahatma Gandhi, have all expressed valid forms of anger, righteous indignation, etc. But in any way, once I cooled down, I think I did the right thing and I apologized, and thankfully I was graciously forgiven. Restoration was achieved and the damage was not permanent. But so let's chat about the different aspects or forms of anger. I think that generally all and any form of anger have been given really a bad rap or totally demonized. Obviously sometimes for very good reasons. I mean, for example, no one wants to be around somebody with permanent anger issues, a hothead who continually rages and quickly loses his or her temper. I mean, your friends and your family and children feel like they have to walk on eggshells in their presence. This is a person clearly who needs to do shadow work and deal with their anger issues. Often caused by buried anger or trauma way back in their childhood. There's an ancient proverb that states, like a city whose walls are broken down is a man who does not control his temper. So what I've noticed is that there are different forms of anger, some valid, some not, from buried anger to righteous and unrighteous anger. Okay, I've already mentioned that, to rage and fury, but today I would like to focus solely on the difference between righteous anger and unrighteous anger. I think for me it's interesting to note that some, if not most, of the greatest spiritual people, leaders that walk the face of the earth, such as Mahatma Gandhi, Jesus the Christ, they experienced and expressed deep anger and frustration with people, with governmental institutions, with authority. They clashed with authority often, and they expressed frustration and deep anger at those in authority. And this is what I call a holy anger or a righteous indignation. A few years back already, Antje Krog, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, she said it was time for anger. She's in South Africa, I think. She said anger was often where important change begins. Not the anger of blind destruction. Please do not misunderstand me. I'm not advocating for people to go onto some kind of blind destruction, angry, and so on. But the anger that brings clarity of direction, lucidity of purpose. Let me repeat this. She said it was time for anger. She said, anger was often where important change begins, not the anger of blind distraction, but the anger that brings clarity of direction, lucidity of purpose. Well said. Somebody else, Peter Chin, he said this: there's a big difference between having an anger problem and having a problem that makes you angry. I'm going to repeat it. There's a big difference between having an anger problem and having a problem that makes you angry. Here in South Africa, we know that our government has absolutely no moral compass whatsoever. If that doesn't make you angry, you must check your pulse, my friend, and see if you're still alive. There's a journalist, author, and historian, Jacob Dlamini, who is the winner of the 2015 Alan Paton Award for Ascari. He has this to say about the South African situation. He said this: I wonder if the time for anger is not long past. I wonder if we do not need something stronger than anger, something perhaps like indignation. In other words, anger laced with moral fury. Now here I've got to put in a bit of a disclaimer, I suppose, if that's the right word, or a note, or NB. Here's a note. One has to be very careful, though. Is your cause really just? Or are you misguided and misled by peer pressure? There's a lot of young social justice warriors, especially in places like America and Europe, that are actually totally misguided. They don't know all the facts, and they're on a wild goose chase. They're very, very angry. It's the sort of the liberal side of the political spectrum have become very, very angry people. And you must know before you start, expressing your dissent, so to speak. Have you done your research? Do you know the facts? Is your cause worth fighting for? Or you just want to be another social justice warrior for attention and to boost your ego? There's a lot of people like that, especially a lot of young people who just are seeking the attention, and they're just virtue signaling. They're virtue signaling just to... And that is just as sickening as false humility or spiritual pride, you see. I think personally, I mean, I'm a Christian. You don't have to be. I'm not speaking to just Christians. I'm speaking to everybody. But for me, Jesus the Christ is a great example of a person capable of expressing a holy anger authentically. Jesus, who was also known as the Prince of Peace, he expressed his anger on many occasions. You just have to read the ancient scriptures of the gospel to clearly see the level of his angry outbursts. But his anger was motivated by love. I'm going to tell you this again. Anger can be motivated by love. Think of it. Love protects. Love protects. Love protects those that are close to them. Well, not just that. Love protects all living creatures. That's what love does. Besides many other attributes of love. I mean, you can write a whole book on what is love, actually. So the love of Jesus for the bruised and the broken was his sole motivating factor. And whenever he verbally attacked, on more than one occasion, much more than one occasion, whenever he verbally attacked those greedy, power-hungry hypocrites in positions of authority or abusing their power and oppressing people in a really evil way, it's very clear to me that the anger Jesus expressed can be defined as a holy anger or a righteous indignation, which is sorely needed today, especially in today's church and church leaders, to challenge the powers of darkness. I'm not going, please don't misunderstand me, I'm not asking for prophets of doom and gloom. I'm not asking for that. But if you just acquiesce to evil powers and you can't even muster up any sort of anger, you're like a flatliner. And that's not going to get us or anywhere, whether you're a Christian or a pagan or a heathen or an atheist or Buddhist, or it doesn't matter what religion you are actually. So that anger of Jesus, that example, that righteous indignation, he used that to challenge the powers of darkness in his day. He was very gentle and tender with the bruised and the broken, but he was an iron fist towards greedy, power-hungry hypocrites in authority. And I'm telling you now, he still is today. He still is today. Remember, he's not still nailed to the cross. He's alive and kicking. Fred May has this to say about the general South African population a few years ago. Very, very interesting. He said this: our threshold of collective civil sensitivity has been eroded brutally, like that of a nation at war. For an outsider, the single most notable feature of the national psyche would, in all likelihood, be the absence of apparent outrage. He goes on to say this: and authorities here and elsewhere in the world must reconsider their callous regard for the rights of perpetrators over the rights of victims. Now you see that a lot. It's what's happening today. A lot of people are talking about everything's upside down nowadays, especially if you look towards Babylon, America, etc. Everything seems to be upside down. In California, that's what they are doing. They are letting criminals out with no bail, etc. And you just have to go and research it. Now, I haven't got time to talk about all of that now, what is going on there. Now, Charles Spurgeon, he also spoke about what he calls Elijah's fire from heaven as being a holy, just, righteous anger. Remember, this anger is directed and motivated by love. So this anger does not destroy. It doesn't destroy. It challenges darkness and it overcomes darkness. But it's not that love that is just pink bubbles that people tend to think about. Love protects. Love challenges. Love holds people accountable. Love will hold, love for people, love for the oppressed will make you dissent against tyranny. So Charles Spurgeon, he said this, and he used this verse from Jonah 4, chapter 4, verse 9, where God said to Jonah, is it well for you to be angry, Jonah? Is it well for you to be angry? And he goes on to say, that's the verse, but Charles Spurgeon goes on to say this. He says, anger is not always or necessarily sinful, wrong or bad, but it has such a tendency to run wild that whenever it displays itself, we should be quick to question its character with this inquiry. Is it well for you to be angry? Is it well for you to be angry? It may be that we can answer yes. It may be that we can answer yes. But very frequently, he goes on to say, anger is the madman's firebrand. Well, we know that. We know that. I mean, that is totally like unrighteous anger, people with anger issues, rage, fury, all of that kind of thing. It's just, that's from people are hurt and broken and traumatized and for a number of reasons. Okay. But then he says it may be very frequently anger is the madman's firebrand, but sometimes it is Elijah's fire from heaven. You have to know that anger that you feel, is it motivated by love? Is it Elijah's fire from heaven? Of course, Elijah was a famous prophet and he called down fire from heaven, and you can go and read that in the ancient scriptures if you want to know the whole story. But Charles Spurgeon goes on to say this: we do well when we are angry with injustice because of the wrong which it commits against our good and gracious God. If you are a believer, you believe in God, or if you're not, you could be, this can really be against the universe. But so he goes on to say, because of the wrong which it commits against our good and gracious God, or with ourselves because we remain so foolish after so much divine instruction, or with others when the sole cause of anger is the evil which they do. Nowadays, in my view, so much evil is coming from tyrannical governments abusing their power, right? So Charles Spurgeon goes on to say, he says, he who is not angry at transgression becomes a partaker in it. God himself is angry with the wicked every day. That's what the ancient scriptures say. God is a God of love. God is love. But God, imagine if you are God and you see people raping your children, are you not going to be angry? Of course you're going to be angry. That's why I say love protects. Love can get angry. Love helps. Love holds people accountable. And it is written in his word. It's written in the ancient scriptures. You that love the Lord hate evil. You, my friend, you can be full of love and you can still hate evil. So then the question is this. Here we come to the big question. My question is, where is your fire from heaven? Do you hate evil? Where is your holy, righteous anger at the gross evil so widely committed by those in the corridors of power in South Africa and in other parts of the world? Just as we have sometimes been guilty of a love deficit, unable to love deeply, are we also unable to tap into a divinely inspired righteous anger? Ask yourself that. I'm going to repeat this. Just as we have sometimes been felt guilty, a lot of us, of a love deficit, unable to love deeply, are we also unable to tap into a divinely inspired righteous anger? Have we become emotional flatliners, unable to take a stand? Are we too afraid or just too desensitized to muster up the emotional energy it takes to get angry with those who abuse their power and destroy an entire country? My friend, you must know what has happened here in South Africa, what has been destroyed here. And let me ask you this, if you're not angry at how your rulers, and I call them rulers because democracy it's a bit of a veil, it's a bit of a smoke screen. I call them rulers, not democratically elected leaders. If you're not angry at how your rulers are destroying your country, then you need to check your pulse. Check your pulse and see if you're still alive. I ask people, and sometimes my Christian friends as well, because in the Christian circles, a lot of people and others, that follow spirituality and certain other religions and gurus, etc. And they will all tell you, no, you must never get angry. Never, ever, ever get angry. You just follow the path of love and you never get angry. I completely disagree with that. So did Jesus, so did Mahatma Gandhi and many, many others. So I've noticed and observed that, okay, I'm talking about Christians now, if I'm a Christian, we've been so long erroneously conditioned to believe that we are just wicked sinners ourselves, and therefore we have no right to direct a voice of anger at corrupt leaders who steal from the poor. I think that we, especially Christians, have become so self-centered that whenever we hear the words wickedness or unrighteousness or something like that, we are so conditioned to immediately look inward. It's almost self-loathing. It's almost self-loathing, not self-love. So we always, it's narcissistic. We always look inward, which is not such a bad thing really. But it's not a place to dwell forever, as this will just paralyze you, the Christian soldier. It is one of the enemy of your soul's greatest weapons. The enemy of your soul, he wants to keep you focused on yourself and your faults. In other words, to keep you self-centered. Listen to me. Looking inward does not negate looking outward. You do it all the time. You're always self-reflecting. You're always checking your motivations. Why are you motivated to speak up? Why are you motivated to speak up? Is it love for people? Or is it to boost your ego? Or are you virtue signaling? You see? And the other thing is this: perfection is not a prerequisite for raising a voice of concern, alarm, or reproof. You just mustn't be a hypocrite. Take the plank out of your own eye before you point at anybody else, whether it's dissent against the government and tyrannical rulers. If you are corrupt, and you better take the plank out of your eye before you start speaking up, right? But perfection, you do not have to be perfect. It's not a prerequisite for raising a voice of concern, alarm, or reproof. Yes, the New Testament encourages us to overcome evil with good. But this word good does not negate taking a stand against evil. The Bible tells us that Jesus, the ancient scriptures of the Bible tells us that Jesus went everywhere doing good, yet he got very angry at times. And he most definitely took a stand against evil. It is written in the ancient scriptures of Jesus Christ, you love righteousness and you hate wickedness. Psalm 4:45. I think another part of our problem is that we just don't hate evil enough. And those that do are made to feel guilty by themselves or by others as though they are second-class people or second-class Christians, devoid of love or humility, unable to extend grace to others. But the New Testament commands us to hate what is evil, Romans 12 verse 9. And King David, whom the ancient scriptures calls a man after God's own heart, he said these words, King David, he said these words, who will rise up for me against the wicked? Who will take a stand for me against evildoers? Right? Mark 3 verse 5. Jesus looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. It was a time he was in the synagogue and he was going to heal a man with a withered hand, and the Pharisees and those religious freaks and nutcases, they were trying to trap him and jail him and kill him. They try to kill him. The religious spirit is one of the most evil spirits you can find. It will literally want to destroy you. There's also the parable of the servant whose debt was forgiven by his master, but he did not forgive the debt owed to him by those below him. It's Matthew 18:34, and it goes like this: and in anger his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. The point I'm making is God can get angry. All right. Obviously, all right, for those that don't know. So, to go on now, what I'm feeling is that our collective silence and lack of emotion or action against the wicked, especially from government and church leaders, are exasperating communities. Because hardly any high-profile leaders, if none, from government or from the church in South Africa, have emerged to take a visible, decisive, active stand against the wicked, and individual communities now have been forced to rise up like vigilantes and fend for themselves. And in a desperate attempt to provide for and save their children, sometimes they, as vigilantes, are taking the law into their own hands, whether it be on the issue of non-existent service delivery by corrupt, inefficient municipalities, or running drug-dealing gangsters out of town because the police won't do their job. In fact, often the police are hand in hand with the drug dealers and the gun runners. It's just a fact, right? The ancient scripture says this in Proverbs, God Jesus detests the way of the wicked, but he loves those who pursue righteousness. That's Proverbs 15 verse 9. Psalm 11 verse 5. The Lord and Jesus examines the righteous, but the wicked and those who love violence his soul hates. The New Testament commands us to hate what is evil. Romans 12:9. And to expose deeds of darkness. Ephesians 5:11. When last have you challenged the powers of darkness and tried to expose them? So I want to say, in conclusion, I ask you, are you angry about the injustice in its many forms that you see around you? If not, I suggest you ask someone to take your pulse, to see if you are really alive. And one last thing I want to leave you with. You got to, please remember this, do not misunderstand me. A lot of people love me. I love a lot of people. I've got a lot of friends. I've got children, grandchildren that love me dearly, and I love them dearly. So a holy anger or a righteous indignation should not steal your joy. Do not let it steal your joy. You can work with both. For example, with me, what keeps me sane in this upside down world, while still dissenting against darkness, is that I love nature. I absolutely love nature. I love hiking. I live here in the Western Cape. I mean, hiking in the mountains here, it's food for my soul. And that's when I often feel closest to my Creator, is in nature and in the mountains or in the sea. Then I love photography. That's a passion of mine. I love photographing anything from people to landscapes to fine art, commercial photography, etc. And then, of course, to have family, the support of family and friends, and to feel connected to people, to feel really, really connected to people, especially obviously if it's a romantic relationship where you are really connected to somebody. All of those things add beauty and color to my world, and it offsets that holy or righteous anger, or some people call it a burden for the oppressed that are being destroyed. So I'm going to leave you with one last thing, is how do you express your anger? Look, that's a long discussion as well, but generally speaking, you got to express your anger lawfully and legally. And you have to know, is it righteous anger or unrighteous anger? Are you getting angry because you're triggered because of something and emotional trauma from your childhood? That you have to know. So I would suggest you do shadow work to sort all of that out, that your ego is not ruling you. But I just want to remind you, this is very interesting, that Jesus turned over tables and chased people with a whip. So anyway, that makes you think. Well, I hope that has given you some food for thought around the topic of anger in its many different forms.